There's a kind of tired that doesn't show up on your face. It sits deeper than that. It's the kind of exhaustion you carry quietly, the kind most men never talk about because it feels embarrassing to admit you've been trying too hard. You don't realize how long you've been running on fumes until something forces you to slow down. It usually starts small. You put in extra effort to keep someone interested. You say yes when you don't want to. You respond fast. You reach out first. You fix problems you didn't even cause. At the time, it feels normal, almost expected. You tell yourself you're being a good man, being supportive, being consistent. But deep down, you can feel the imbalance you're giving more than you get, and you're pretending it doesn't bother you. What makes it worse is how subtle the pressure becomes. You start treating every interaction like a test you have to pass. If she pulls back, you push harder. If she seems distracted, you try to be more interesting. If she stops showing effort, you double yours. And the whole time, you're convincing yourself that this is what you're supposed to do, that chasing is the price you pay to be wanted. But there's a moment, usually late at night, where the truth catches up with you. You feel that ache in your chest, that heaviness you can't ignore anymore. It's not heartbreak, it's depletion. You're tired of feeling like you're auditioning for a part in someone else's life. You're tired of stretching yourself thin just to keep a connection alive. And you're tired of pretending you're okay with it. Most men never admit this out loud. They just keep pushing through it, hoping the effort pays off, hoping the other person finally shows up with the same energy. But internally, something starts to crack. You begin noticing how much you've been sacrificing. Your time, your pride, your peace. And even though you don't say it, you feel the resentment building. This kind of exhaustion isn't about physical effort. It's emotional. It's psychological. It's the fatigue that comes from constantly reaching for someone who never meets you halfway. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you question your worth. And worst of all, it makes you forget what it feels like to be genuinely chosen, not just tolerated. Every man reaches a point where he realizes he can't live like that. Not because he suddenly becomes stronger or colder, but because the constant chasing slowly drains the life out of him. You start to understand that the problem isn't the person you're chasing, it's the fact that you've been running after something that was never running towards you. And once that truth hits you, even quietly, everything starts to change. It doesn't happen instantly, but a shift begins. You stop pretending you're fine. You stop ignoring how drained you are. You start seeing the cost of the chase more clearly than ever. There's always a moment where something inside you just stops. It doesn't come with a big speech or a dramatic exit. It's quieter than that. It feels like waking up from a long dream you didn't know you were in. One day you realize you don't have the energy to keep proving yourself, and you finally let go. Most men think letting go happens after some major event, a breakup, an argument, a clear rejection. But more often, it's the smaller things that push you over the edge. Maybe it's that one message they didn't answer even though you replied within seconds. Maybe it's the way your effort goes unnoticed, or how you always have to initiate everything. Or maybe it's simply the realization that you feel more anxious than appreciated around them. Whatever the trigger is, it hits you differently this time. Instead of trying harder, something in you says, enough. It's not anger. It's not bitterness. It's more like a surrender to the truth. You stop trying to force something that clearly isn't flowing. You stop explaining your worth. You stop chasing the version of the relationship you hoped it would become. For the first time in a long time, you listen to your own discomfort. You finally admit what you've avoided. Chasing hasn't brought you closer to what you want. It's only pulled you further away from yourself. There's a strange calm that comes with this shift. You're not excited, but you're not hurting the same way anymore. You're just done. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop replaying conversations. You stop making excuses for their lack of effort. You stop trying to read between the lines for signs that aren't really there. It's like your mind finally catches up with what your heart has been feeling for months. And yes, there's fear in this moment too. The fear of losing them. The fear of feeling alone. The fear that maybe you're giving up too soon. But even that fear feels different now. It doesn't control you anymore. It just sits there, quiet, while you start choosing yourself for the first time in a long time. Letting go isn't about giving up on love or connection. It's about releasing the version of yourself that believed the only way to be valued was through constant effort. It's about stepping back and seeing the situation without the fog of hope blinding you. You start noticing how much of yourself went into keeping things afloat. You see how unbalanced it really was. And somewhere inside, a voice you've ignored for years finally speaks up. The voice that says, "You deserve more than this." That voice becomes the anchor you hold onto as you detach. You don't chase anymore. You don't beg for attention. You don't over-explain. You simply step back and let the truth reveal itself. And the moment you do that, everything quietly begins to shift. When you finally step back, the things you try to overlook start standing out in painful detail. All the moments you brushed off, the dry replies, the cancelled plans, the one-sided effort, they hit you at once. You realize you were carrying the connection by yourself while telling everyone you were fine. It's strange how clear everything becomes when you stop pushing. You start seeing the little ways you bent your own boundaries just to keep the peace. The way you accepted bare minimum effort because you didn't want to lose someone who never really showed up for you. The way you kept hoping things would change if you just tried a little harder. You're not angry, you're just honest with yourself for the first time in a long time. And that honesty hurts, but it also frees you, because once you see everything you ignored, you can't go back to pretending. When you strip everything down, the truth is usually simpler than you want it to be. You weren't chasing because the connection was deep or because the other person was irreplaceable. You were chasing because something inside you was scared. Most men don't want to admit that. It feels weak, but fear has a way of hiding under words like effort and commitment. You tell yourself you're fighting for something meaningful, but underneath it, there's this quiet panic, the fear of being alone, the fear of starting over, the fear that maybe this is the best you'll ever get. And when you're scared, you cling. You overlook things you shouldn't. You convince yourself their inconsistency is temporary, or that you're just overthinking. You keep showing up because the idea of losing them feels worse than the reality of how little you're getting back. What hits you hard later is realizing you weren't chasing them. You were chasing the feeling of being wanted. You were trying to fill a space in you that didn't come from them in the first place. Once you understand that, everything shifts. The pressure lightens. You stop forcing what shouldn't need force. You start seeing the difference between connection and attachment. And for the first time, you begin to separate what you want from what you're afraid to let go of. When you finally step back, you learn more in a few quiet days than you learned in months of trying. Distance has a way of stripping away the excuses you used to protect the situation. When you're not chasing, you see people for who they really are, not who you hope they'd become. You start noticing who reaches out and who disappears, who checks in and who only cared when you were available on demand. It's uncomfortable because the people you thought would show up often stay silent, and the silence says more than any long conversation ever could. There's something sharp about realizing the effort you were giving was the only thing holding everything together. When you stop, the whole dynamic falls flat. Not because you're playing games, but because you finally removed the pressure that was disguising the truth. You see who valued you and who just valued the attention you provided. What surprises most men is how fast the clarity hits. You begin to understand that if someone wanted to be there, they'd be there without you pushing. It wouldn't take reminders, hints, or constant effort on your part. People who care don't make you guess. They don't keep you wondering. They don't go missing the moment you stop trying. And you also see something about yourself. How much of your identity got tied to being the one who tries? When you remove that role, you're left with a more honest version of yourself. Someone who wants connection but doesn't want to earn it through sacrifice. Distance doesn't just reveal other people. It reveals you. It shows you what you've been allowing. It shows you what doesn't sit right with you anymore. It shows you the difference between wanting someone and needing them to validate you. And even though it stings, the truth brings a kind of peace you didn't expect. Because once you see things clearly, you stop fighting what's already showing you it doesn't want to stay. Once you stop chasing, something in your energy changes without you even trying. You move differently. You talk differently. There's a calmness that wasn't there before. Not because you don't care anymore, but because you're no longer tied to the outcome. You stop reacting to every small thing. You stop overthinking every message. You stop feeling like you have to manage the entire connection by yourself. That pressure lifts, and you finally get a taste of what it feels like to live from a place of self-respect instead of desperation. People notice this shift even if you don't. You're not reaching as much. You're not explaining yourself as much. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're just steady. And that steadiness comes from realizing you don't have to force anything meant for you. You start valuing your time more. You pull back when the energy feels off instead of trying to fix it. You listen to your gut instead of ignoring it. And without chasing, you naturally become more grounded. Almost like you finally return to yourself after being stretched thin for too long. What's interesting is that this shift isn't loud. You don't announce it. You don't try to look unbothered. It's quiet and real. It comes from finally choosing yourself in situations where you used to abandon yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. And that's what changes everything. Not the distance, not the silence, but the decision to stop betraying your own needs. What's ironic is that once you stop chasing, the same people who barely gave you their attention suddenly act like they can feel the shift. They might not say it outright, but their behavior changes. They start checking in more. They reply faster. They pay attention in a way they didn't when you were putting in all the effort. It's not magic. It's not some strategy. It's just that people sense when your energy is no longer wrapped around them. When you're not waiting on their next move, you stop feeding their ego, and they feel the absence of that attention. Some people come closer because they actually value you. Others come back because they miss the validation you used to give them. The distance helps you tell the difference. You also notice how you feel around them. When someone reaches out now, you don't jump. You don't rearrange your day. You take your time, not out of pettiness, but because you're not operating from urgency anymore. You're showing up when it's real, not when you're afraid. And there's a confidence in that shift, not the loud, bragging kind. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you don't need anyone to choose you for you to feel whole. You want connection, but you don't depend on it to feel grounded. People notice that. They feel it in the way you speak, in the pauses you take, in the way you don't over-explain yourself anymore. And the ones who genuinely care start showing up with more consistency because they see you respecting yourself. What surprises you is how natural it feels to no longer chase. You're not acting tough. You're not playing hard to get. You're just moving from a place of clarity instead of fear. And once that becomes your new normal, you stop letting anyone pull you back into the old version of yourself. There's a certain peace that shows up once you stop forcing everything. It's not dramatic or life-changing overnight. It's just this steady calm, like your mind finally has room to breathe again. When you stop chasing, you stop living in that constant state of worry, the what did I do wrong, and why aren't they responding, and how do I fix this? Thoughts that used to run your life. You begin to realize how heavy everything felt when you were trying to control the outcome. And once you step back, you see that most of the stress didn't come from the person. It came from your own fear of losing them. Without that pressure, things settle. Your thoughts quiet down. You start paying attention to your own life again instead of revolving around someone else's availability. What feels different now is the simplicity. You're not analyzing every interaction. You're not trying to predict what someone will do next. You're not bending yourself into shapes just to match their inconsistency. You let people show you who they are without trying to guide them into being someone they're not. And in that space, clarity grows. You see who fits into your life naturally and who only fit when you were chasing. You understand that anything real won't need you to sacrifice your peace to keep it alive. You don't have to overperform. You don't have to constantly prove your value. The right people don't require pressure. They meet you where you are. This peace isn't about indifference. It's about acceptance. You accept that some things aren't meant to last. You accept that you can't make someone choose you. You accept that your effort alone can't build a relationship. And that acceptance frees you in a way chasing never could. Once the noise clears, you start to see your own patterns more honestly. You notice how low your standards had slipped when you were chasing. You accepted mixed signals, excuses, cancelled plans, and half effort because you were afraid that asking for more would push them away. And in a way, it did. It pushed you away from yourself. Now, with distance and peace, you start raising the bar again. Not out of revenge, not out of pride, but because you finally understand what it costs to keep your standards low. It costs your confidence. It costs your time. It costs your self-respect. You realize that anyone who makes you feel anxious more than they make you feel appreciated is not your person. Anyone who only shows effort when you pull back isn't offering real consistency. Anyone who needs you to chase them just to keep the connection alive isn't meeting you as an equal. And the more honest you are with yourself, the more natural it becomes to walk away from anything that feels one-sided. You don't beg. You don't argue. You don't try to convince them of your value. You simply step back because you know that the right connection won't punish you for having standards. Rebuilding your standards doesn't mean becoming rigid or guarded. It means knowing what you're willing to give and what you're no longer willing to lose. It means understanding that your attention is valuable, your presence is valuable, and anyone who wants a place in your life has to show up with more than convenience or charm. And what surprises you is how quickly your life changes when you stop settling. You start choosing situations that actually feed you. You start recognizing what healthy effort looks like. You start valuing people who don't make you guess. It's not about becoming picky. It's about finally knowing your worth without needing someone else to confirm it. Silence used to feel like punishment. When you were chasing, any pause felt like rejection. Any slow reply felt personal. Any quiet moment felt like something was slipping away. But once you stop chasing, silence becomes something different. It becomes a mirror. You start noticing things about yourself that you couldn't see when you were busy trying to win someone over. You see how much you tied your self-worth to their attention. You see how easily you overlooked your own needs. You see how afraid you were of being alone with your own thoughts. And in that quiet, you learn things you didn't expect. You learn that you weren't weak. You were just trying too hard to be chosen. You learn that you gave too much because you didn't know how to ask for more. You learn that you were holding on so tightly because you didn't trust that someone better would come along. Silence gives you space to understand these things without judgment. It shows you where your fears were running the show. It shows you where you kept bending your values. It shows you the parts of you that need care, not criticism. You also notice strengths you forgot about. You remember that you have a life outside of who you were chasing. You rediscover hobbies, routines, and parts of yourself that were pushed aside. You realize you're not as dependent on anyone as you thought. You're more capable, more grounded, and more resilient than you gave yourself credit for. What you learn in the silence changes how you show up moving forward. You stop basing your value on whether someone else stays. You stop making fear-based decisions. You start choosing situations that feel steady instead of ones that keep you guessing. And the most important part, you start liking who you are again. At some point, the way you look at relationships changes, not because you became colder, but because you finally understand what it feels like to keep choosing someone who never really chose you back. And once you've lived through that, you don't want to repeat it. You start paying attention to the small things, not the words, but the patterns. Who shows up without being reminded? Who makes space for you without excuses? Who respects your time, your effort, and your presence? These things matter more to you now than chemistry or attraction or potential. You realize that real connection isn't supposed to feel like chasing. It's supposed to feel mutual. It's supposed to feel steady. It's supposed to feel like both people are moving toward each other, not one person doing all the running while the other decides whether to care. And once you've tasted that clarity, the old dynamics lose their appeal. Mixed signals don't excite you anymore. Hot and cold behavior doesn't pull you in. You don't feel the urge to prove yourself to anyone. You've outgrown the version of you who thought effort could earn love. So choosing people who choose you means you stop gambling with your self-worth. You stop accepting crumbs when you know you bring more than that to the table. You stop giving people access to you when their actions show they don't value it. And the more you live this way, the easier it becomes to walk away from anything that feels uncertain or unbalanced. Not with anger, not with attitude, just with the simple understanding that your peace is worth more than someone's temporary attention. When you choose people who choose you, relationships feel different. They feel easier, safer, more honest. You don't have to guess how someone feels. You don't have to chase reassurance. You don't have to sacrifice yourself just to keep things alive. And the truth is, once you learn to move this way, you never want to go back. When the chase ends, you start living with a different kind of clarity. It's not about being guarded or distant. It's about being deliberate. You move slower but with purpose. You think before giving your energy. You notice how situations make you feel instead of how you hope they'll turn out. You're no longer driven by fear or urgency. You're not trying to prove anything. You're not trying to fill a void. You're choosing from a place of calm, and that alone changes the quality of everything in your life. Your relationships, your habits, your goals, even the way you talk to yourself. You stop rushing into people who confuse you. You stop over-investing in situations that drain you. You stop using effort as a way to earn connection. Instead, you let things develop at a natural pace. If someone matches you, great. If they don't, you let them drift without forcing anything. Living with intention doesn't make your life perfect, but it makes it honest. You trust your instincts more. You protect your peace more. You recognize early when something feels off, and instead of fixing it, you give it space. Whatever's real, stays. Whatever's not, fades. That truth becomes easier to accept. And what's interesting is that this intentional way of living doesn't make you colder. It makes you more open, but only to the right people. You have room for real connection now because you're not wasting your energy on uncertainty. Your life feels lighter because you're no longer carrying the weight of trying to keep others interested. In the end, everything becomes clearer. Not because the world changed, but because you finally stopped chasing long enough to see it for what it is. When you live with intention, you choose yourself without losing your capacity to love. You value connection without sacrificing your dignity, and you move forward with a kind of quiet confidence that makes everything feel steadier.